Okay, as quickly as possible, I'm hoping that this presentation will explain in a little bit more detail what's expected of the assignment regarding the timeline and the rationale. You might be lulled into a false sense of security of thinking that because you are producing a 1,000 word written piece, this particular assignment is not equally as complex as a 2,000 words straight essay, the kind of assignment that you will be used to writing by now. You would be wrong to think in those terms. The production of the timeline is quite a complex and analytical task. Of course, you could throw any old rubbish as significant dates onto your timeline, but the thing must have some sort of coherence and tell some sort of overall story. Last semester we looked at these particular themes. In particular, we looked about the development of the early years, an introduction to higher education, and an introduction to vocational education and how it has been compared and contrasted to more traditional academic education. We've also considered the development of standards over time, and also the fact that children and young people in this country are now in school from a younger age until an older age and for an increased duration of time during the day. We also finally looked upon the impact that culture can have on students engaging with the education process. These are all themes. You might think of considering what are the key milestones in the development of vocational education in this country. Similarly, higher education, similarly early years. However, as the module has progressed into this semester, the content has become more complex. And this is what we've studied in this semester. This semester was intended to build on the baseline that we put down last semester and develop a more critical view of education over the last 200 years. But essentially we might be talking about the last 50 years because this is when most of the developments took place. I've presented each of these sessions as a debate to illustrate the critical nature of the discourse. So I've always tried to present on one hand one side of the story and on the other side of the debate an alternative explanation. So for example, is modern learning and modularised learning, the kind of things that you experienced at GCSE, within A-level and at university, i.e. you are examined at the end of a module and then there is other than obtaining a mark for that module, there is very little consequence of that learning. Is that described in the kind of negative frame of it's just learn it and forget it? Or the alternative view is that with the vast production of knowledge in a knowledge economy, it's actually beneficial and expedient to learn something, forget it, in order to make space to learn new skills. Citizenship. Citizenship used to be taught in schools as an integrated topic, integrated into the curriculum. However, a number of features, as identified in the Clarke's Packs and so on, led to citizenship being developed as a distinct topic in school and a distinct aspect of the national curriculum. Are there consequences for either an integrated approach and a distinct approach? And we talked about some of the problems with the distinct approach in that many of you experienced citizenship training in the form of PHSRE and such things, but didn't take it very seriously for a number of reasons. And there are a number of reasons in the way that it's taught, the reason it's assessed, and the actual content of what citizenship is aiming to achieve that leads to students perhaps not taking it seriously. And there are, of course, consequences of that students come out of the other side of education being and I wouldn't like to use the word illiterate around citizenship issues, i.e. what it means to be a citizen within society. We then looked at the idea that does education emancipate people and provide them with opportunities that they wouldn't ordinarily have, or is it as a process of indoctrination and getting people to conform to a very narrow set of criteria, perhaps the national curriculum or the need to ultimately obtain a job. This strangely titled Plato and the Sausage Machine, Education and Employment, is really about an old 3,500 year idea that education should be pursued for its own sake, for the love of knowledge, as prescribed by Socrates and Plato, or really is education just like a machine, a sausage machine taking raw materials of young people at one end and churning out productive members of society at the other end? And by productive members of society, we might consider people who can be employed. So this particular session was looking at the relationship that education has with employment. There are some key reports, such as a Leach report and so on, that came out that have emphasised and tried to strengthen these links. But in the Clarke's pack, there are further signposts for you to explore this theme further. We've then looked at structured time and freedom, and as structured education has become more structured as it's developed over the years, there's developed a backlash or criticism to that, in that some commentators such as Tim Gill, Ulrich Beck and other people that you encountered in the Clarke's pack have criticised the overstructuring of children's time, both free time and school time, such as in the work of Blatchford, in the case of schools, because it has negative consequences for the way in which children learn. In other words, they are not given opportunities to think for themselves in a free environment and solve their own problems. They're guided by adult-initiated activities in both learning and their free time. And again, there might be consequences of this within the field of work and employment, in that some commentators have noticed that freedom and the ability to solve one's problems is related to the concept of innovation. And if we want students coming out of an education system who are innovators and creative and can think for themselves, maybe we should be providing them with more opportunities to do this, rather than highly structuring and guiding them through projects of study, which kind of makes this video a little bit ironic, I think. Secondly, last week we looked at student voice and the emergence of student voice, and this is heavily related to changing definitions of childhood, in that for much of the 200-year period under discussion, the 200 years of education, children were seen and not heard. Children were seen as second-class citizens, not worthy of having a voice. Over the last 20 or 30 years or so, and in relation to key documentation, and I mentioned the overarching significance of the UNRC 1989, which you should mention if you tackle this theme, students and young people and children in general have been given more say in services that affect them, and this includes education. What are the relevant milestones in that have promoted the emergence of student voice over the years? Although this is slightly out of date, this handbook regarding the progress tutorials, we are then going to look at education as a right. And this is related to the UNRC document, or is it a privilege? This might be caught up in the work of John Stuart Mill, for example, or more of a responsibility view that students must have regarding education, rather than seeing the thing as a right, and which in some areas leads students to and pupils to think that education is something that they're entitled to, but also something to be endured. And then we're going to look at pastoral care and the emergence of pastoral care, if it has indeed emerged, or has it always been present over the 200-year period of education that we're talking about, in that the relationship between care and education is strong, despite the fact that recently the National Education Department has been split from the Department of Children, Young People and Families. Does this mean that the current climate sees education as something distinct and separate from care? Okay, in the next tutorial, I'll explain, in the next video tutorial, which you can access online on Moodle, I'm going to explain how these themes, these are themes, ought to be, and themes here, ought to be integrated and used in the assignment. Thanks.